There is absolutely something dreadful about your locks. They are called dreadlocks for a reason, and that reason has much more history, context, and meaning than many people understand. Hey everybody, it's Caasi back again. This video started off as a simple hot take, but since I refuse to spread misinformation, it has become somewhat of a research project. I've had locks for a long time, and I've been on YouTube for a long time. Long enough that I witnessed the transition from the popular term being dreads to it being locks, and I witnessed the reasoning as to why people felt locks was a superior term that they wanted to use now. The phrase of the day that seemed to win everybody over was, "There's nothing dreadful about our locks," with the idea that the term dreadlocks came from people finding our hair dreadful and that we needed to separate ourselves from that. There was also the idea for a while that dreads and locks were two different things, with dreads being the kind of wild hair you would find on a Rastafarian, while locks were the more maintained tresses that you would upkeep in a natural hair salon. And unfortunately for some people with internalized anti-blackness who subscribe to respectability politics, that made the term dreads have even more of a negative connotation. When I started YouTube, I used the word locks in my videos because that's what everyone used. But I never had an issue with saying dreads, and I kind of missed it being popular because, quiet as it's kept, I like dreads better. But there were people back then who would chastise you for saying it, and I know people to this day who are not okay with the term dreads and will whip out that nothing dreadful phrase as the be-all end-all defense as to why no one should be using it. I think people have an issue where they hear something that sounds clever and they just go with it, and I think that's what happened with this phrase. Nothing dreadful about our locks sounds clever and catchy, and it seems positive, so people just latched onto it. I've seen the merchandise and the t-shirts. I know that the sentiment is still a thing, but I want it not to be. I really don't like that phrase because I feel like it discourages further thought on why dreadlocks are called dreadlocks. It frames the term as an automatically negative thing and doesn't encourage you to learn more. I am all about learning more, so I got beef. I honestly think if you have a problem with the term dreads or dreadlocks, that you shouldn't. But if you keep it to yourself, hey, whatever. But if you go further than that and start correcting people when they talk about their own dreads or when they try to compliment your dreads and you tell them there's nothing dreadful about our locks, then now you've transitioned into being loud and wrong and you sound condescending and uneducated. There is absolutely something dreadful about your locks, and I want to tell you about it. All right? What is the definition of dread? Great fear or apprehension. And what is the definition of dreadful? Causing great fear, suffering, or unhappiness. But why would these terms be associated with our hair? And why would we want them to be? In his book, Rastafari and Other African Caribbean Worldviews, Jamaican sociologist and anthropologist Barry Shavans has a chapter called The Origin of the Dreadlocks. It tells the story of a group of radical Rastafarians known as the YBF, or Young Black Faith. Founded in 1949, they were extremely critical of society and of the older Rastas that came before them. They helped to institutionalize the usage of ganja as Rastafarian spiritual practice during a time when police were targeting Rastas for that very thing. The YBF saw this targeting as oppression and didn't respect the older Rastas whose solution to this oppression was to be cautious and not get caught. The YBF rejected the older generations who they felt were too concerned with integrating in society and had done little to advance the goals of Rastafarianism. The general public already had a misguided fear of Rastas, and the YBF took on the name the Dreadful because they were so dedicated to their doctrine and so aggressive in their criticisms that they were the most feared of all. The most radical members of the YBF had absolutely zero desire to blend in with Jamaican society. They assumed their alienation due to their race and faith, and they leaned into it with their physical appearance. While other Rastas kept their hair combed, these members allowed their hairs to form into matted locks as a symbol of their African heritage, their Nazarite vow, and most significantly as a rejection of mainstream society. Their nickname, the Dreadful, and their distinctive hairstyle became synonymous, and these radical YBF members became known as the Dreadlocks. As time went on, dreadlocks became associated with the most dedicated Rastafarians, who were themselves known as Dreads, a name reminiscent of the Dreadful. To them, the dread they represent is the faithful fear of God, the oppressor's fear of the free, and the society's fear of the rebel. Historically, this is not the origin of the hairstyle itself, but it is the origin of the hairstyle being referred to as dreadlocks, which tells us that the term has a distinctly Black origin and cultural meaning. While the young Black faith were gaining notoriety and political influence in Jamaica, the Kenya Land and Freedom Army, also known as the Mau Mau Warriors, were fighting against British colonizers for independence in their own country of Kenya. If you Google why are they called dreadlocks, the unreliable highlighted text at the top of the screen will tell you that those British colonizers were the ones who coined the term dreadlocks, expressing their terror at the appearance of the Mau Mau, whose hair looked quite a lot like mine. While that doesn't seem to be historically accurate, the sentiment is the same. The Mau Mau wore their hair as a symbol of anti-colonialism and of cultural pride, and they fought the British fiercely from 1952 until Kenya won its independence in 1963. Now, going even further back in history, let me read you something from slaveryandremembrance.org about Maroon colonies in the Americas. The institution of slavery was threatened when large groups of Africans escaped to geographically secluded regions to form runaway slave communities, often referred to as Maroon communities. Such communities were established throughout the Americas, particularly in the Caribbean and Brazil. They developed their own culture, government, trade, and military defense against their European and American oppressors beyond the sight and control of the planters or colonial officials. Major efforts were made by European militaries to track down and destroy Maroon communities, but those attempts were normally rebuffed by the Maroons. For example, the British were unable to defeat the Maroons in Jamaica and therefore established a treaty with them. The Caribs of St. Vincent and Maroons in Suriname did the same. Contrary to popular belief, enslaved Africans in the Americas were not docile victims who just laid back and accepted the abuse without resistance. There is a rich and powerful history of enslaved resistance efforts, and the Maroon colonies were some of the biggest victories of those efforts. The Maroons not only escaped enslavement and established their own free communities, but they returned to the plantations to steal food, sabotage production, and most importantly, free others. The Maroons were the slaveholders' greatest fear come to life. Intelligent, resourceful, and unafraid Black people who were fighting back. Even the European and American armies could not beat them and were absolutely terrified of them. These free Black people caused great fear, suffering, and unhappiness in the lives of their oppressors. And when you think about the Maroons, these free Black people living in the wilderness, what do you think their hair looked like? Probably something like this. I imagine the nightmares of slaveholders were filled with people whose skin and hair were like mine, exacting their well-deserved vengeance. How dreadful for them. So please understand, when I tell you that your locks are dreadful, when I tell you that you sound uneducated for saying they're not, I'm not trying to be flippant or disparaging. I am telling you that you, as a free Black person, strike fear into the heart of those that want to oppress you and pathologize your culture. You, with your hair as a historical symbol of resistance, intimidate those with weaker constitutions who seek safety in the status quo. You, accepting and loving yourself in your natural state, are a dreadful sight to those who believe they never can. They are called dreadlocks for a reason, and that reason has much more history, context, and meaning than many people understand. I hope I've done enough today to help you understand and to convince you that not only are your locks dreadful, but that it's an amazing thing that they are. I hope I taught you a little bit about history and encourage you to think a little deeper about supposedly clever phrases. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed this, and I'll see you next time. Bye!